A few months ago, I started this Target video series to show how the average adult could shop for groceries at Target with a budget of just $10 per week and not only have enough to eat, but slowly build a pantry. Week 1, I bought all of this and had this left over. Week 2, I bought all of this and had this left over. And here is week 3 of the series. Imagine this scenario. Your weekly grocery budget is just $10. And sadly, with the pandemic and mass unemployment and underemployment, this is a reality for many Americans right now. For the first week, you spent just $6.25 on your extreme minimalist groceries at Target, so that means that for week 2, you had $13.75 to spend. You also didn't use up all of the oil and salt that you bought during the first week, so you still had about 32 ounces of oil and most of a pound of salt already in your pantry. And after a week of eating 2,000 calories per day, this is what you're left with: 5 carrots, 8.5 pounds of rice, a third of a bottle of oil, about 2 pounds of flour, a pound of dried beans, salt, and vinegar. Clocking in at over 22,000 calories, this is already enough food to feed the average adult for a week and a half. But we are focusing on building a pantry so that we can have a better variety of food in our diet and save more money ultimately down the road. So we're going to keep going and spend another $10 on food this week. Technically, we still have 67 cents left over from last week, so we have $10.67 to work with on week 3. So for week 3, this is what I bought: a 5-pound bag of flour, a pound of chickpeas, a large onion, 16 ounces of peanut butter, 4 pounds of sugar, spinach, and baking soda. This cost $9.69 and is 19,250 calories. Notice that now, when I combine this new batch of food with what I already have in the pantry, I'm starting to have a pretty nice variety of ingredients. And that is the ultimate goal here. Once you have a solid pantry base of very cheap pantry staples like grains and legumes and seasonings and fats, then you can start to incorporate more fresh food, which tends to be tastier and healthier, but also a little more expensive. So let me explain why I bought what I did. First, flour, chickpeas, and an onion. You may remember these from weeks 1 and 2, and if you haven't already seen those videos, check them out for more details. Basically, flour and beans are not only cheap, but in tandem, they take care of all of your very basic nutritional needs. Onion will add amazing flavor to most savory dishes, and I don't know about you, but it's very important to me that my food tastes good. And now on to the new ingredients that I have bought for the first time. Sugar. But isn't sugar bad for you, you might ask? And I say, you try going for more than 2 weeks without any sugar and tell me how you feel. Sweetness is one of the main tastes in food. While sugar in large quantities can be bad for your health for a number of reasons, a little sugar here and there will round out your dishes and make your food taste so much better. Also, if you're able to forage any local fruit, you can make free jam. All you need is sugar and fruit. No pectin, no fancy jars, just sugar and foraged fruit, and you've got a delicious spread packed with flavor and nutrients. Aside from sweetening the hot caffeinated beverage of your choice, sugar is also crucial for baking any kind of sweet treat, which, again, in moderation, won't kill you and will boost your morale significantly. We already have flour, another essential for most baked desserts, so all we're missing now is a leavening agent, which brings me to baking soda. So every week of this series, you may have noticed that I have bought one ingredient that isn't technically food. The first week was salt, the second week was vinegar, and now on week 3 it is baking soda. Just like salt and vinegar, baking soda may offer you no calories, but it is still an essential part of any kitchen or household. You may already know that it can be used as a cleaner. It freshens bathrooms, refrigerators, carpets, laundry. You can even mix some with water and use it as a toothpaste. But you want to know what else you can mix it with? The vinegar we bought last week. Not only is this a fun little science experiment, but this chemical reaction helps cakes rise. So now with sugar, flour, water, the vinegar we bought from week 2, and the oil and salt we bought from week 1, we can make an extremely basic vegan cake. But every cake needs a topping, which brings me to peanut butter. Peanut butter is basically one of the best all-around foods to get if you are on a budget. It's cheap, relatively healthy, it's a great source of plant protein and fat, and best of all, it requires no preparation. You can just eat it out of the jar with a spoon. If you're not an American, this might sound gross to you, but if you are an American, you've probably done this at some point in your life. Most people use peanut butter as a spread. If we're limiting ourselves to what we've been buying at Target for the last couple weeks, you could spread some on homemade flour tortillas, for example. But now that we have sugar and leavening agents, we can bake cake. Melt a little peanut butter with some sugar and you've got a simple frosting for that simple cake. Add a little homemade jam from foraged blackberries and you've got a peanut butter and jelly cake. Peanut butter can also be used in a variety of sauces and dressings, and no pantry is complete without a jar. And last but not least, spinach. Now that we have a few items in our pantry, it's time to start splurging on fresh food. Okay, confession. I was originally going to buy frozen spinach because usually that's a much better deal and then you don't have to worry about it going bad. But Target was actually completely out of frozen spinach when I went there. In fact, they were out of just about every single frozen vegetable that exists at Target, which is unfortunately a common occurrence nowadays when you go grocery shopping. So I had to buy fresh instead, but I actually compared the prices and the fresh spinach that day that I went there happened to be the same price that the frozen spinach would have been. So I didn't spend any extra money on this. Another thing that I must acknowledge here is that Target is not a great place to buy fresh food. Not only is their selection a bit lacking, but the prices are not that low. Pantry staples tend to be very cheap at Target, especially if it's their Market Pantry or Good and Gather brands. So Target is a great place to start if you want to build a pantry from scratch on limited funds and no car, or if you lack the ability to buy in bulk. But if you want to save money on fresh produce, I have found that the best place to do that is to shop at your local Asian market. You can sometimes also find some pretty good deals on like bulk grains and legumes as well at Asian markets, although those are usually going to be higher quality brands. So yeah, you're gonna get a deal on it, but it's still ultimately gonna be the same price or more expensive than a cheap brand of something at Target. Also, Asian markets tend to have, what are considered to be Western ingredients like flour and white sugar and like peanut butter and vegetable oil and stuff like that. They tend to have those ingredients, but they tend to have them in smaller quantities, brand name only, and they tend to be a lot more expensive at Asian markets. So you kind of have to selectively shop for certain things at certain places. If you're building a pantry and buying all these pantry staples, Target is actually not a bad place to start, especially when you compare it to mainstream grocery stores like Safeway or any of the Kroger stores. But it's not all about pantry staples. There's other foods besides that. And yeah, I found that for fresh produce, nothing beats Asian markets. But even if you are on a tight budget, after a while you can start to splurge on fresh veggies like spinach, which offer very little calories, but they are packed with nutrients, and they add nice pops of flavor and texture to your food. Combined with chickpeas, onions, salt, baking soda, flour, and oil, you can also make spinach falafel. Yes, falafel. If you're lucky enough to afford garlic and a couple other spices, you can make falafel almost as good as the stuff you'd get at a restaurant and save yourself even more money. And if you're one of those people who often finds themselves with a mostly unused bag of soggy, rotten greens at the end of the week, here's a little tip. Always buy a tender green that can be eaten cooked, like spinach, baby chard, baby kale, etc. Use this in your salads and sandwiches instead of lettuce. And as soon as you open the bag, immediately blanch half of it and freeze it for later use. 40% of food in the US goes to waste. Don't be part of that statistic. So how would this week work exactly? Assuming your calorie needs are 2,000 calories per day, you'll need 14,000 calories total in the week. Since you just bought almost 20,000 calories this week and you still have over 22,000 calories of food left over from the previous 2 weeks, this puts you in a great position with a lot of possibilities. You could, for example, eat half of the spinach fresh in falafel and some salad with an oil, vinegar, onion, salt dressing, and freeze the other half for later. You could eat half of the chickpeas in the falafel and half of the pound of beans from last week as refried beans. Use most of what's left of the bottle of oil to fry your falafel and beans. Eat a pound of rice on the side of those dishes. Use a quarter of the peanut butter, about a cup and a half of sugar, a pinch of baking soda and vinegar, and some flour in a cake. And round out your week with a few homemade flour tortillas every day, using another quarter of your jar of peanut butter on some of those tortillas as a topping. This would give you 14,000 calories of food for the week and leave you with 7.5 pounds of rice, about a cup and a half of oil, about 2 pounds of flour, most of the bag of sugar, half of the spinach, half of the peanut butter, half of the bag of chickpeas, half of the bag of beans, most of the containers of salt, baking soda, and vinegar. This is 27,555 calories and could feed the average adult for 2 weeks. And you'd still have 98 cents left over to add to your $10 for next week's shopping trip. So as you can see, if you start thinking more long-term like this and less week to week, you can build a pantry and save a bunch of money, even on a very low grocery budget. So this brings my Target series to an end. The goal of this was to just show how you could, with only $10 a week, starting completely from scratch, gradually week to week, build a pantry full of staples to help you save money in the long term. If you stick exclusively with these pantry staples, you definitely could eat enough food, be sated, not be hungry, and grow a pantry. But let me emphasize that this is for the average American, and not everyone is the average American. Some of you watching this might not even be in the United States. In addition to that, some people don't have time to cook all of the food. Some people need more than 2,000 calories a day. Some people live in food deserts. They don't even have a Target nearby. They have to get their food from like Walgreens or something where it's marked up and a lot more expensive. Some people, some of you have even mentioned in the comics, and some people, many of whom have left comments in previous videos, cannot eat a lot of carbohydrates because they're pre-diabetic or diabetic, or they have other issues, or maybe they're gluten intolerant and they can't eat things like flour. And unfortunately, carbs are cheap. Carbs are like the cheapest things that you can buy. So if you cannot eat carbs, if you can't eat that many carbs, you're just going to have to spend a little more money. And also, even though Target is relatively a universal grocery store in the US, the prices are not always going to be exactly the same, especially in these trying times. Prices are fluctuating. Prices have generally been going up on food in the last year, I have noticed. So even, if you're watching this video after I've published it, you may check out the prices at Target and be like, wait a minute, that when she bought it, it was only 89 cents, but it's $1.15 now. That happens. That's very natural. But hopefully you got some ideas from this series, and also just all of the ingredients I feature here, aside from like the spinach, are universally very cheap no matter where you buy them. If you want to know how to cook some of the recipes that I've been talking about in all of these videos in the series, I've got links in the video description. Thank you to all the patrons for supporting this channel, and thank you for watching.